One of Joe's movies, I think to myself, this is exactly the way I would have done it. I wouldn't change a thing. Which probably says more about me than anything else, but I think it says a lot about how he connects with his generation of filmgoers, and certainly all generations of filmgoers. Once again, Mr. Joe Dante.
Well, if you got credit for Enrico Caruso at the end, is this a classy picture or what?
Speaking of classy, I'm sure the one question on everybody's mind, what was it like working with Brother Theodore?
Well, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Brother Theodore, who was sort of an East Coast phenomenon. He was, I don't know what you would call him, a raconteur, a monologist. He had an amazingly dark history before he became a monologist in the war. And he, by this time, was very honest, on his last legs, kind of, and was very quiet. He had a minder because he was an old guy, and so we had to make sure there was always somebody with him in case he would fall down or something. But he was a very sweet man, and despite his persona, his manufactured persona, which was very gruff and active, he was just a really nice fellow, and I enjoyed what time I had with him. Unfortunately, when you're making a movie, you really don't get to hang out, as much as you would like with the actors, and so your time is basically, what you can do on the set with them. And he was very, very hard of hearing. And there's a scene in the picture where they first go into the house, and Carrie Fisher has to explain to him about there's certainly a different kind of a house when the Nats lived here, and the reason she's acting that way is because he couldn't hear the cues. And so whenever they would talk, and it was about the time for his cue, he would have to really, really make it loud. And we didn't change it because people were in the movie. But he was a very sweet guy.
You said in the introduction there was a lot of improv going on. So did he rewrite his dialogue to suit himself, or did he pretty much stick to the script?
Some of the funniest things in the movie are improvs. And Brother Theodore stuck pretty much to the script, although he would improv expressions and grunts and various guttural things. But I mean, there's a funny line that Bruce Dern says about him. He says, "Oh, about a 9 on the Simpson scale." No, that was completely ad-lib. Bruce isn't even on camera. He just ad-libbed it during a shot. And there's a lot of that kind of stuff in the picture.
Let's go back to the beginning. How did you come to be involved in this project in the first place?
It's a Dennis Bartok kind of question, isn't it?
I suppose.
That's the one that makes me go, "Oh my God, tell that story."
Well, we don't have
no
no obligation.
The thing is, this was brought to me by Imagine Pictures, who had a deal with Universal, and this was going to be their first movie, and that's Brian Grazer and Ron Howard. And it was a script called Bay Window by Dana Olson, and everyone involved seemed to be under the impression that it was some kind of Hitchcock parody. And when I read it, I didn't see it that way. It seemed like Rear Window to me. I mean, it just didn't have that kind of quality to it. It was much more of a contemporary sort of crazy neighbor movie to me. And as I said, the original idea was to shoot it in a real place, to go to Arizona and shoot it in a housing development or something. But the upcoming strike made that impossible anyway. So we revamped the backlot, and we shot it up there one summer when there was almost nobody else working in Hollywood because most people had shut down. And so, it was just us and the raccoons and the deer and all the other creatures that live up on the top of the Universal backlot. It was one of those movies where they really left us alone, and we got to do it pretty much the way we wanted. And it was a great experience working with this particular group of people because they were all so bright. And they were all into what they were doing, and they would come up with new stuff that wasn't in the script every day. And when it was good, it would just go right through the movie.
Now, is it true that Corey Feldman's house is actually the Munster house, but you shot it in a way that you couldn't recognize it?
Well, I don't know if you can't recognize it, but it is indeed the Munster house. And it's got that cupola that he's in there. That's the Munster cupola house. We tried to make a virtue of the fact that all the houses are mismatched. And what's another thing that's interesting about that particular setup, which you can see every week on Desperate Housewives, the Desperate Housewives, the title,
is a different kind of paranoia.
It's a different kind of desperate. is that the houses on one side of the street are right up against the edge of a cliff, and so they just fall off completely. So there are no backyards at all. And for Tom's house, Rick Dukelman's house, there was a little road that used to run behind those houses where the tram tour would go, and we filled those in and made them into backyards. And the problem with working at Universal is the trams, which make much more money than any of the movies, are the first important thing to the people at Universal. And so nothing must stop the trams. I mean, they really don't like it when you stop the trams while you're shooting. And in my first visit to Universal in the 70s, when I first came to Hollywood, I took the tour, and I was this close to Claude Akins, right here, playing Sheriff Lobo. And I'm in my tram car. And Claude Akins is right there being filmed in a show. He's talking, and the guy, the guy is saying, "Oh, that's Claude Akins, but he's shooting the Sheriff Lobo show." And I thought, I can't believe this. I mean, they're talking while he's doing his dialogue. And the secret was that at Universal, everything was moved. Every picture, if you look at old Leave It to Beaver episodes, and you listen to the sound, you'll find that it's very disembodied because everything was moved later. They never paid any attention to the sound, like Celine. You know, it didn't matter. The tram came first, and they have very loud motors, and they, you know, and then we were also right next to the Jaws ride. So every so often, you know, in the middle of a shot, you'd hear, "Blah, blah, blah, blah." So it's a strange place to work, but it's always been that way. Universal, they've always had audiences come in and watch the shooting, even in the silent days, and so they've kind of always had a tour of some kind. But now it's got to a point where it really has overcome the actual making of the movie, and the tour itself is Universal.
So how much of this is production sound and how much was relooped?
A lot of this is production sound because the guy I like to use, Ken King, is one of the best guys for trying to get the best out of production sound. And as Marshall will tell you, we really don't like looping. Directors don't like looping in general because unless there's something wrong with the performance, you're really not going to get a better performance out of an actor in a looping stage, which is, you know, very sort of empty. And I once had Bob Picardo play an alien for me in a picture called Explorers, and he wore this incredibly heavy suit that made him like sweat, and he did a lot of improvs on the set, and he sort of became this alien, and he when he came to loop the part, he couldn't do it because he wasn't in the same space in his head that he had been on the set. So I always try not to loop if possible, but sometimes you have to do it for various reasons.
Now, getting back to what you said about Rear Window, first time I saw it, it did strike me as a little bit Hitchcockian, but more like the TV show where you're always suspicious of your neighbors. And, of course, there's the classic Twilight Zone episode, The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street. Was any of this striking a chord with you while you were doing the picture?
Well, yeah, because the problem with the movie was that in the original script, the one that I read at the beginning, Tom Hanks dies at the end. Wow. And when he's in the ambulance and Henry Gibson he discovers that Henry Gibson is indeed a bad guy, the ambulance drives off, and he's dead. And the Universal people say, "Well, we can't kill Tom Hanks, so we gotta fix it." So the problem in the script was that you were never supposed to know what the Klopeks were up to in their basement. We plant all these clues about what they're doing and all these, you know, the strange lights, strange noises, and digging in the backyard. No clue what the actual outcome would be because the joke was a twist that indeed they had been guilty all the time. Well, when that went, we had to come up with an ending. And we shot several different endings, one of which is in the movie, not the first one. And I think there's another one on the DVD. Our first ending is on the DVD. But none of them are really as satisfying as the idea of just doing a little Heinrich twist at the end. So, you know, that was always the part of the picture that was the least satisfying for me. But I think up to there, you know, it's pretty funny.
Now, we can't talk about Joe Dante without talking a little bit about Dick Miller. And I noticed during this part of your career, it seemed to me like you were using Dick in a variety of, for lack of a better term, ad hoc comedy teams. here he's with Picardo, in the next picture he's with John Sayles, in the Gremlins pictures he's with Jackie Joseph. Was this sort of a conscious decision on your part to use them that way, or is it just how the cards fell?
No, it's really how the cards fell. I mean, when I did my first picture with Dick, we just sort of got along great, and I had been watching Dick for years, and I said, I want this guy in all my movies, because I like to watch him act, and he became a friend of mine. And so when I get a script, you read a script for two reasons. One, you want to do it, and two, is there a part for Dick Miller. And the great thing about Dick is that because he can take a big part or a little part without any bruising of his ego, it was like, well, he could be a cab driver, he could be the garbage man, he could be, whatever. And he always made more out of what there was there. And then every so often, when the parts would be bigger, like in Gremlins or Gremlins 2, where it's even bigger. And that was all fine with him. And it was one of the fun things about making pictures, was that Dick had been in every movie I ever made except for one, where he got cut out.
But it's on the DVD, though.
And it's on the DVD, yes.
Let's talk a little bit about Matinee. Also, a very paranoid kind of movie in a way. Tell us a little bit about, again, how you came into this. Is the Dennis Bartok question again. How you came into it and how you approached it.
Well, only in looking back at my stuff do I notice how paranoid it all is. But Matinee is set in 1962 during the Cuban Missile Crisis, which most of you were too young to remember. But I can tell you that as a kid who grew up in the 50s and watched, giant bug movies, which are all metaphors for atomic radiation and the bomb and the end of the world, most kids were pretty much terrified that the world was going to end anytime they heard an airplane fly over. And when we would be in our schoolrooms doing our lessons or whatever, once we heard an airplane come over, you would tense up, and then you'd wait for the whistle of the bomb, which we had been told in the movies, the plane goes over, they drop the bomb, and it makes a whistle. And this was not helped by the fact that we were constantly paraded out into the hallway for these so-called alerts, where we would do drills in case it was a real alert. You'd be sitting here in the corridor, and the walls would fall in on you and kill you. And so that was supposed to make you feel better. Get under your desk, get a duck and cover, all that stuff. I mean, look, kids aren't stupid. I mean, maybe this is a joke, but the level of fear in just everyday life was actually fairly pronounced. I mean, people went ahead and did the laundry, and they went to the supermarket, they did all those things. But underneath it all, there was a feeling that any minute the world could end. And in 1962, that all sort of came to a head where people all over the world really did think that weekend the world was going to end. And so in Matinee, it just happens to be the weekend that our hero, movie producer, decides to premiere his new giant bug movie. And it's sort of about the commingling of real horror and movie horror, and it's sort of how we deal with things like that.
But like the Burbs, didn't this also originate, I mean, the script started out being very serious, right? And then along the way you decided to make it more of a comedy?
No, the script, actually, the original script was a fantasy about a haunted movie theater that has a vampire projectionist and an evil matron, and they sort of scare the kids. And the one thing that was in both versions was the movie that's on the screen, which is man, half all terror. And that became the most fun part of the movie for me, because of course I grew up in those movies, and we spent the first week of our shooting in Florida shooting the Man movie, because we had to project it in the theater, and we shot it in black and white, and we got a lot of people who used to be in those kind of movies, and tried to make it look as real and as much like a movie from that period as possible. The only trick we sort of played was that the lead character is sort of based on William Castle. And William Castle never made those kind of movies. He made lots of horror movies, but he never made any giant bug movies or science fiction kind of movies at that point. And so we cheated a little with that, because by 1962 they really weren't making that many of those kind of pictures. But nonetheless, it was meant to evoke an era, and a lot of people, when the movie came out, it was fun seeing people bring their kids to the movie and say, look, this is the kind of movies that Daddy used to go see in a single screen theater, which is hard to imagine.
And it's